Imagine this. You're sitting in first class, ready to relax on a long flight, when a flight attendant tells you that you don't belong there. You've got the right ticket, but she insists you move to the back of the plane. Why? Because of who you are and the shocker. She has no idea that your father is the CEO of the airline. What happens next will make you rethink how people are treated in the skies. Stay tuned, because this story is about to take a turn you won't see coming. The airport buzzed with energy as passengers shuffled through the gates, rolling their luggage behind them with varying degrees of urgency. Overhead announcements echoed through the terminal, signaling the imminent departure of flights, while the sounds of hurried footsteps and polite conversations blended into a cacophony of travel. Among the crowd stood Mia Thompson, a young, accomplished professional who glanced down at her watch. It was almost time to board, and she couldn't help but feel the excitement bubbling within her. This wasn't just another business trip for Mia. This flight, headed to the West Coast, was particularly important. She'd spent months preparing for a crucial meeting with a potential investor, a moment that could elevate her career in ways she could hardly imagine. She had carefully chosen her seat in first class, knowing the flight would be long and tiring. A comfortable seat was not just a luxury, it was a necessity for her mental focus during the journey. Dressed in a tailored blazer and crisp slacks, Mia exuded confidence. She approached the gate with her first-class boarding pass in hand, scanning the room briefly as she moved toward the line. The air was thick with anticipation as other passengers gathered, some eagerly chatting, others lost in their own world. Mia felt a quiet sense of pride as she neared the front of the line. It wasn't about the luxury of the first-class experience, it was about the recognition of hard work. She'd earned this. But as she approached the gate, something shifted. Rachel, a flight attendant with sharp eyes and a dismissive expression, stood at the front, checking boarding passes as passengers boarded. Mia smiled politely as she presented her ticket, expecting the usual greeting. But Rachel's eyes flicked over Mia's pass with an air of indifference, barely meeting her gaze. "First class, huh?" Rachel muttered, almost under her breath, scanning the boarding pass a second time. There was a strange pause before she looked up, her lips curling into a tight smile. "You're in the right place, right?" she asked, the words laced with a subtle, barely perceptible tone of condescension. Mia blinked, caught off guard by the unnecessary scrutiny. "Yes, I'm in first class," she replied, her voice steady but cautious. "Here's my ticket." Rachel's eyes narrowed slightly, not out of curiosity, but something far more unsettling: disdain. Rachel hummed, almost as though she were dismissing Mia's response before even hearing it. She waved her hand nonchalantly toward the plane. "All right, head on through," she said, her tone barely masking her irritation. As Mia stepped forward, she could feel Rachel's gaze lingering on her back, cold, calculating. She walked down the jetway with a flicker of unease, her footsteps sounding louder in her ears than usual. Mia couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. There was a tension in the air, thick and unspoken, like a low hum that only she could hear. As the door to the plane loomed closer, she took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had no time for distractions, but the knot in her stomach tightened as she stepped onto the aircraft, where the warm glow of first class seemed to promise comfort. But Mia felt anything but comfortable. Rachel followed Mia aboard, but her demeanor had shifted. Her eyes scanned the passengers quickly, calculating who fit in and who didn't. As Mia approached her assigned seat, she felt Rachel's eyes once again linger on her, sharp and judgmental. "Is this seat taken?" Rachel asked suddenly, her tone seemingly polite. But the underlying judgment was impossible to miss. Mia froze for a moment, the suddenness of the question catching her off guard. She glanced around, realizing that the flight attendant wasn't referring to the empty seat beside her, but rather as if she didn't belong in this area of the plane at all. "No, it's mine," Mia said, her voice calm but firm, holding up her boarding pass for Rachel to see. Rachel's smile flickered for just a moment before it returned, colder than before. "First class is for paying customers, you know. Not just anyone can walk in and expect to sit here," Rachel said, her voice casual but condescending. Mia's heart skipped a beat, the words hanging in the air like an accusation, but she couldn't let it get to her. She had worked too hard to let this woman's attitude ruin her moment. "I am a paying customer," Mia replied, her voice unwavering. She felt the weight of the situation press down on her, but refused to back down. "I have a confirmed first-class seat." She extended her ticket towards Rachel, her hand steady. Rachel glanced at the ticket, her eyes briefly flicking over the details, then quickly looked away as if dismissing it without thought. "I don't think so," Rachel said, a false politeness in her voice. "I'll check with the head attendant." Mia's heart sank as Rachel turned and walked off, leaving her standing there, uncertain of what was happening. The other passengers around her started to notice the exchange, some casting curious glances, while others appeared to shuffle uncomfortably in their seats. Mia tried to keep her composure, but the feeling of being singled out, of being judged, gnawed at her. The hum of the cabin seemed to grow louder in her ears. The whispers, the side eyes. It was as though Rachel's prejudice had seeped into the very air around her. She wanted to believe it was all a misunderstanding, but deep down, Mia knew that something more insidious was at play. As Rachel disappeared down the aisle, Mia took a moment to breathe. She looked down at her phone for a brief distraction, but the text from her assistant caught her attention. "All set for the meeting." Mia's fingers hovered over the screen as she prepared to reply. But the weight of what had just transpired, the lingering sense of being targeted, forced her to pause. She exhaled slowly, reminding herself that she was strong, that she had earned every part of this experience. She'd been through too much to let one person's prejudice shake her. The hum of the plane's engines grew louder as the aircraft taxied down the runway, lifting off the ground with a powerful surge. Mia settled into her seat, adjusting the plush pillows behind her back and pulling the soft velvet blanket over her legs. The luxury of first class, with its spacious seating and impeccable attention to detail, usually put her at ease. But today, there was a weight on her shoulders that no amount of comfort could shake. As the plane ascended into the clouds, Mia glanced around the cabin. The quiet buzz of passengers talking and the soft clinking of glasses filled the air. The flight attendants moved efficiently, offering drinks and snacks to the first-class passengers. Yet Mia couldn't help but feel the unsettling presence of Rachel, who had now resumed her duties with an air of practiced indifference. Rachel's eyes scanned the cabin, pausing only briefly when they landed on Mia's seat. Mia felt a chill pass over her. She didn't need to look up to know that Rachel was watching her again, calculating, judging. Mia attempted to shake off the discomfort, choosing to focus on her upcoming meeting. She pulled out her tablet, scrolling through her notes for the presentation. The distraction was brief, and she found herself looking up once more, catching Rachel's eyes. The flight attendant's gaze was sharp, and for a fleeting moment there was something dark in her stare, something that made Mia's skin prickle. Before Mia could even react, Rachel was back, a tray of drinks in hand, moving down the aisle with practiced efficiency. She stopped at Mia's row, but instead of offering the usual cordial greeting, Rachel's eyes lingered on Mia's drink order with a slight tilt of her head. "What can I get you?" Rachel asked, her tone polite, but there was an underlying sharpness that Mia couldn't ignore. "I'll have a glass of water, please," Mia said, trying to keep her voice steady, her smile polite but strained. She could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a flight attendant serving a passenger. This was a subtle power struggle. Rachel nodded but didn't immediately leave. Instead, she stood there, eyes lingering on Mia for a beat too long. The silence stretched between them like an uncomfortable void, until Rachel finally turned and walked away. Mia's stomach tightened. She glanced around, half expecting to see other passengers whispering about the awkward exchange, but they were all absorbed in their own worlds. Yet the uneasy feeling didn't go away. Mia pulled out her phone again, scrolling through her messages, but the incessant buzzing of her nerves made it hard to focus. The flight carried on in an unsettling silence as Rachel moved about the cabin, serving drinks and snacks with a clinical detachment. But Mia couldn't escape the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. Rachel was still lingering, and Mia knew it was more than just a coincidence. Her interactions were purposeful. Every time she passed Mia's row, there was an undercurrent of animosity in her gaze, something that went beyond mere professionalism. It was almost as if Rachel was looking for something to criticize, something to diminish Mia's worth as a passenger. Mia sat back in her seat trying to focus on her work, but every time she looked up, she felt that cold, piercing gaze on her once again. The subtle hostility simmering beneath Rachel's actions made her feel small, as though she was being sized up for reasons that had nothing to do with her being a paying customer. The flight was long, and as the hours ticked by, Mia began to realize just how much the weight of Rachel's treatment was starting to take its toll. She tried to compartmentalize the incident, but it was hard to ignore when Rachel's behavior continued to remind her of her place, or rather, what Rachel assumed was her place. But Mia wasn't the type to let things slide quietly. She had always prided herself on her ability to stand up for what was right, even when it wasn't easy. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that no one, especially not a flight attendant, could diminish her value. And then, just as the discomfort started to bubble over, Mia caught sight of something that made her pause. The CEO, Mr. Thomas Gray, the CEO of the airline, stepped onto the plane, walking with the calm confidence of someone who had seen it all. The shift in energy was instant. The passengers, once lost in their own worlds, sat up a little straighter. Whispers of excitement and curiosity began to ripple through the cabin as the CEO made his way down the aisle. Mia's heart skipped a beat. She'd heard rumors that Mr. Gray occasionally took flights to observe his airline's customer service firsthand, but she never expected to see him on this flight, and certainly not under these circumstances. Rachel, who had been so sure of herself moments ago, suddenly became stiff, her movements slower, more deliberate. The arrogance that had defined her behavior seemed to evaporate as soon as she caught sight of the CEO. Mia watched, her breath steady, as Mr. Gray made his way to the front. He didn't engage in small talk, nor did he acknowledge the passengers directly. Instead, he simply took his seat. His presence felt like a quiet command in the cabin. As Rachel continued her duties, Mia couldn't help but wonder if the CEO had already noticed the tension between her and the flight attendant. Was Rachel aware of his presence? Did she know what kind of consequences awaited her if Mr. Gray did indeed take note of her behavior? The uncertainty in the air was palpable. The flight attendants moved with a newfound sense of caution, and even Rachel, once so assertive, now seemed almost uncomfortable. Mia's eyes stayed trained on her, watching her every move with a calm, composed gaze. There was no turning back now. The pieces were in motion, and the tension in the cabin was undeniable. Mia had no idea what would come next, but one thing was certain. This flight was about to take an unexpected turn. As the flight continued its journey across the sky, the mood in the cabin subtly shifted. The moment Mr. Thomas Gray, the CEO, had entered the plane, something had changed. The air felt heavier, charged with anticipation. The passengers, who had been murmuring quietly to one another, now sat straighter, as if waiting for something to happen, even though no one dared speak the words aloud. Mia sat in her seat, trying to focus on her presentation notes, but her mind kept drifting. The sound of the engines above her, the soft clinking of glassware in the background, and the occasional shuffle of feet were all drowned out by the internal hum of her thoughts. Could Rachel feel it too? The flight attendant's behavior had become more calculated now. The casual, dismissive air that Rachel had worn like a badge of honor had disappeared. She moved through the cabin with stiff precision, her interactions clipped and efficient. Gone were the smirks and the sharp words, replaced by a cold professionalism that felt just as unsettling. Mia watched as Rachel passed by, her eyes flicking quickly over the passengers in her path. When Rachel reached her row again, Mia braced herself. This time, Rachel didn't pause, didn't offer any words of disdain or snark. She simply slid her eyes over Mia's seat as if to say, "I know you're watching," before continuing on with her duties. Mia couldn't shake the feeling that Rachel was now walking on eggshells. It was as if the mere presence of Mr. Gray had stripped away her confidence, exposing the fragile arrogance beneath. The tension that had once seemed isolated to her and Rachel now seemed to reverberate through the entire cabin. As the flight wore on, Mia noticed more and more passengers sneaking glances at Mr. Gray. His aura of authority wasn't just felt by Rachel, it was palpable to everyone in the cabin. Even the flight attendants, who had been moving quickly and cheerfully before, now seemed to tread more carefully, performing their duties with more precision and far less chatter. But Mia didn't feel entirely at ease. She couldn't stop replaying the earlier interaction with Rachel in her head. The dismissiveness, the cold attitude, the feeling of being unwanted. The more she thought about it, the more it ate at her. She knew that if she let it slide, she would regret it. No, she wasn't going to let this go. As Mia sat, lost in her thoughts, her phone buzzed in her lap. She glanced down and saw a message from her assistant. "Everything okay? Any issues with the flight? You seem distracted." Mia didn't hesitate. She typed a quick reply. "There's something off with one of the attendants, Rachel. Her attitude has been really off. I'm trying to ignore it, but it's hard." She hit send and leaned back in her seat, taking a deep breath. She felt an overwhelming sense of frustration, and at the same time, a deep sense of resolve. She wasn't the type to back down, not from anyone, not from Rachel, not from anyone who thought they could diminish her, but what happened next was completely unexpected. Suddenly, the intercom crackled to life. The captain's voice, calm and professional, filled the cabin, though there was an unusual edge to it. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We'd like to extend a warm welcome to Mr. Thomas Gray, our CEO, who is aboard today's flight. We appreciate your attention as we strive to maintain the high standards that our passengers expect. Please do not hesitate to approach any of our crew members should you need assistance. Thank you, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your flight." Mia felt a subtle shift in the room. It wasn't just the announcement that had made the difference. It was the way the captain had said it, with an unspoken weight behind the words. He hadn't simply acknowledged Mr. Gray's presence. He had highlighted it, drawing a clear line between the passengers and the higher powers that ran the airline. Rachel's movements had grown even more cautious. As she passed through the cabin, she seemed to avoid making eye contact with anyone, especially Mia. The usual arrogance in her posture was now replaced by a tense rigidity. Mia felt her own heart rate pick up. This was it. The moment of reckoning was near. Rachel's behavior had been appalling, and the CEO's presence was no longer just a casual observation. It was an opportunity. Mia's frustration began to transform into a quiet but powerful sense of anticipation. The hum of the engines, once a soothing sound, now felt like the ticking of a clock, counting down to something inevitable. Mia's thoughts were sharp, focused. The CEO was watching, and with him, the promise of accountability. She just needed to hold on a little longer. As Rachel walked past once more, Mia met her eyes. For the briefest moment, Rachel faltered. There was a flicker of recognition, something almost like fear in her gaze, before she quickly looked away. Mia's mind raced as she leaned back into her seat. She was no longer merely a passenger on this flight. She was a participant in something far more significant. The game had changed. As the flight continued through the clouds, the atmosphere in the cabin grew thicker, charged with an energy that seemed to have permeated every corner. It wasn't just the presence of the CEO that had shifted the mood, it was the anticipation, the unspoken awareness that something was about to happen. Mia couldn't shake the feeling that the moment was fast approaching, the moment when Rachel would either change her tune or face the consequences. She sat in her seat, her fingers lightly gripping the armrests, her mind racing through the earlier interactions with Rachel, the dismissive glances, the harsh tones, and the palpable sense of superiority. It was all so unnecessary. But Mia wasn't just frustrated anymore. There was something deeper at play now, an unshakable sense of justice. Rachel's behavior had crossed a line, and it needed to be addressed. She had every right to expect respect, especially when she had earned it through her loyalty to the airline. No one, least of all a flight attendant, should be able to treat her like this without facing some kind of consequence. The thought of it made her stomach churn, but she refused to let the fear of confrontation stop her. Mia had learned long ago that silence in the face of mistreatment was a form of acceptance. She wasn't about to accept this. Suddenly, the sound of the intercom crackling pulled Mia from her thoughts. The voice of the captain filled the cabin once more, but this time it wasn't a general announcement. It was direct. Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to inform you that we will be making an unscheduled stop shortly. The airline's CEO, Mr. Thomas Gray, will be coming forward to personally address a matter involving one of our crew members. Please remain seated, and thank you for your understanding. Mia's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just the CEO's involvement that startled her. It was the calm, authoritative tone of the captain. The message was clear. Something was happening, and it was happening now. The power dynamic had shifted entirely. As the announcement faded, Mia glanced at Rachel. The flight attendant, who had previously strutted through the cabin with an air of superiority, now appeared visibly unsettled. Her stiff posture had softened, her movements more tentative. She seemed to hesitate for a moment before continuing her route down the aisle, her eyes darting from one passenger to the next, avoiding the gaze of anyone who might challenge her. Mia's pulse quickened. This was it. She had no idea what exactly was coming next, but the change in Rachel's demeanor was undeniable. There was something about her, a change in her attitude, a shift that suggested she knew her actions would not go unpunished. The plane continued to cruise above the clouds, the soft whir of the engines humming in the background as the passengers adjusted to the sudden change in atmosphere. The once bustling cabin had grown quieter, the hum of conversation replaced by hushed whispers and the clinking of silverware. The tension was tangible, wrapping around everyone like a heavy blanket. Then, at the front of the plane, the door to the first-class section opened. Mr. Thomas Gray, the CEO, walked into the cabin, his presence immediately commanding attention. Passengers who had been avoiding eye contact now turned to look, their curiosity piqued. Some even straightened in their seats, recognizing the gravity of the moment. Rachel, who had been moving swiftly just moments ago, froze in her tracks. Her face, once so confident, now appeared pale and rigid. She hesitated, her hands shaking slightly as she adjusted the cart she was pushing. The sudden appearance of Mr. Gray seemed to paralyze her, and Mia couldn't help but watch the flight attendant's every move. Mr. Gray didn't acknowledge anyone specifically, his eyes scanning the cabin with a professional detachment. He made his way toward the front, where he paused briefly, exchanged a few words with the head flight attendant, and then turned his attention to Rachel. His gaze lingered on her for a moment too long before he spoke in a voice that cut through the silence. "Rachel," Mr. Gray said, his tone calm yet firm, "I've been informed of your treatment of one of our passengers today. I believe you know exactly who I'm referring to." Rachel's breath hitched. She glanced nervously at Mia, who sat with her back straight, eyes steady. The weight of the moment pressed down on Rachel, and Mia could see the flight attendant's composure begin to crack piece by piece. I I didn't, Rachel stammered, her voice faltering under the weight of the CEO's stare. It was just a misunderstanding, Mr. Gray. Save it, Mr. Gray interrupted, his voice still calm but growing more authoritative. There's no room for misunderstandings when it comes to treating our passengers with respect, not on my airline. Rachel's lips parted, but no words came out. Her once commanding presence was gone, replaced by a nervous uncertainty. Mia could see the way her hands clenched around the cart, her knuckles white. The flight attendant, who had prided herself on her power over the passengers, now stood, powerless, in front of the man who could change everything. "Please, come with me," Mr. Gray continued, his voice unyielding. "We're going to have a discussion about this." Mia's heart beat faster as she watched Rachel, her face a mixture of panic and humiliation, slowly step toward the aisle. The other passengers watched in silence, some exchanging glances, others quietly whispering. It was clear no one had expected the situation to unfold this way. Rachel was being called to account, and everyone knew it. The tension in the cabin reached its peak as Mr. Gray escorted Rachel down the aisle, his posture straight, his eyes never leaving her. For the first time, Rachel seemed completely small in comparison, like a child caught in the act of misbehavior. Mia, though she felt a mixture of relief and satisfaction, didn't allow herself to smile. This wasn't a victory to gloat over. It was a reminder that people like Rachel needed to learn respect, not just for others, but for themselves as well. The battle wasn't over yet, but the scales had tipped. As Mr. Gray and Rachel disappeared toward the back of the plane, the cabin erupted into quiet murmurs, but no one dared speak too loudly. The CEO had spoken, and Rachel's fate had been sealed. For Mia, the sense of justice was tangible, and yet it didn't quite feel like the end. It felt like the beginning of something bigger. The flight seemed to slow down, even as it raced through the sky. The moment Mr. Thomas Gray and Rachel disappeared down the aisle was like a veil lifting, leaving the passengers in a collective hush. The air around them felt different now, charged, expectant, as if they were all waiting for the next act in this strange drama unfolding in front of them. Mia remained seated, her eyes locked on the spot where Rachel had just been standing. Her heart was still racing, the adrenaline of the confrontation still echoing in her chest. She felt a quiet satisfaction, but it was tempered by something else, something more reflective. Had Rachel learned her lesson? The weight of the situation settled in. Mia had stood up for herself, and now Mr. Gray was standing up for what was right. She couldn't help but admire the CEO's calm demeanor, his ability to maintain control and professionalism in such a charged moment. He didn't need to shout or make a scene, he simply made it clear that there was a line, and Rachel had crossed it. As the minutes ticked by, Mia couldn't help but wonder what was happening behind the scenes. Was Mr. Gray having a private conversation with Rachel, or was there something more public awaiting her? What would the outcome be for the flight attendant who had treated passengers like pawns in her little game of authority? Mia wanted to believe that Rachel's actions would be addressed, but a part of her feared that it might all end in empty words. The unease that had initially gripped Mia was slowly replaced by a sense of resolve. She had done the right thing by standing up for herself, by insisting that her dignity be respected. But this wasn't just about me, she thought. This is about everyone who's ever been treated like that. No one deserves to feel invisible, to be dismissed or belittled because of who they are. Mia's thoughts were interrupted by the soft chime of the intercom, followed by the voice of the captain once again. His tone, though calm, was markedly different from his earlier announcements. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we'd like to thank you for your patience. The matter with our crew member has been resolved, and we appreciate your understanding. As always, we strive to maintain the highest standards of service on board. Thank you." The announcement was brief, but it carried weight. It wasn't just an apology, it was a statement of intent. Mia could almost feel the weight of the captain's words hanging in the air. Something had shifted, and it wasn't just a change in the atmosphere. It was a sign that the airline took the incident seriously. There would be consequences for Rachel's behavior. Still, the uncertainty remained. What were those consequences going to be? What did resolved truly mean? A few moments later, as if on cue, Mr. Gray emerged from the back of the plane, his posture straight, his expression as composed as ever. He moved with purpose, but there was a new energy in his step. This wasn't just a CEO walking through his plane. This was someone who had taken decisive action, someone who had made sure the airline's values were upheld. Rachel was nowhere to be seen. Mia's heart thudded as Mr. Gray passed her row. He glanced in her direction, catching her eye for a split second. His expression softened, almost imperceptibly, before he continued his path toward the front of the cabin. The look he gave her was one of acknowledgement, silent, but powerful. Mia didn't feel the need to say anything. She knew that this moment wasn't about words. It was about the quiet satisfaction that came from knowing she wasn't alone in this. The CEO had taken action, and that was all that mattered. A few moments later, the flight attendants began their rounds again, but something was different. Their movements were smoother, their interactions with passengers more genuine, less stiff. Rachel's absence was felt by all. Her authority, her arrogance, her condescending attitude were all gone, replaced by a subtle sense of professionalism that had been sorely lacking. The passengers were still talking among themselves, but the tone had shifted. No one was whispering about Mia anymore, not with the same tone of judgment that had been present earlier. The murmurs were different now. There was an undertone of respect, a sense that Mia had stood her ground, and in doing so had earned the respect of those around her. The cabin wasn't just quieter, it was more peaceful. As the flight continued, Mia found herself settling into the comfort of knowing that the airline's leadership had acted swiftly. It wasn't about personal victory, it was about accountability. Rachel had been given a chance to represent the values of the airline, and she had failed. Now the consequences were clear. Mia allowed herself a small smile, though it was a bittersweet one. She knew this wasn't over, not yet. Rachel's fate would likely continue to echo in the halls of the airline long after the plane landed, but for now, Mia had her answer. The power imbalance had been corrected, and the message had been sent. As the plane began its descent, Mia looked out the window at the endless expanse of clouds beneath her. She felt a quiet sense of closure settle over her. The storm had passed, but the lessons learned from it would stay with her. In the distance, the runway loomed closer, and for Mia, it wasn't just the end of the flight, it was the beginning of something new. A reminder that standing up for yourself, no matter how difficult it might seem, always had its rewards. As the plane touched down smoothly on the runway, the familiar hum of the engines gradually faded, replaced by the soft sound of passengers gathering their belongings. The cabin had shifted since the confrontation. What had once felt like an undercurrent of tension now seemed to dissipate, replaced by a calm that settled over everyone in the plane. It wasn't just the landing. There was a palpable sense of resolution that lingered in the air, as though the entire flight had been a slow, drawn-out moment of reckoning. Mia stood up, pulling her carry-on from the overhead compartment. She moved with the same quiet confidence she had from the moment she boarded the flight. The events of the last few hours had solidified something deep inside her. Standing up for herself had not only earned her respect from her fellow passengers, but had also confirmed that there was power in speaking out, even when faced with those who felt they could treat you like less. As the other passengers began to disembark, Mia took one last look around the cabin. It was still, almost eerily so. There were no whispers, no murmurs of judgment or confusion about what had happened. Instead, There was a new energy, one that recognized the importance of what had just transpired. There had been a lesson here, and it wasn't lost on anyone. Before she stepped out into the terminal, Mia noticed something out of the corner of her eye. Mr. Thomas Gray was standing near the aircraft door, his posture just as commanding as it had been when he entered the plane. He wasn't trying to blend in or make himself invisible. He was there, a steady presence that radiated authority. But now, as Mia's gaze met his, she saw a different side of him, something that felt more personal than the corporate leader she had seen earlier. He caught her eye for a moment, and this time, the small smile he offered was genuine. A quiet acknowledgement passed between them, as if he were saying, "I see you, and I appreciate what you did today." Mia gave a subtle nod, returning his smile. No words were exchanged, but it was enough. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment when it wasn't just about what had happened on the plane, but about knowing that her actions had made a difference. She had made an impact, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever felt like they didn't belong, like they were somehow less. As Mia exited the plane, she felt a mix of emotions swirling within her. The relief was palpable, but there was something else, something deeper, a sense of pride in herself for having the courage to stand up to someone who thought they could diminish her simply because of her position. And there was a quiet strength in knowing that Mr. Gray had taken her side, not just as a passenger, but as a person deserving of respect. At the gate, Mia was met by a group of colleagues waiting for her. They greeted her with smiles and handshakes, but Mia felt a slight shift in their demeanor. It wasn't anything overt, just a subtle change in the way they looked at her. It was as though they, too, had witnessed something important, even though they hadn't been in the cabin. They saw how she had handled the situation, and in that brief exchange, Mia could tell they respected her more than before. As she made her way through the terminal, her phone buzzed in her bag. She pulled it out to find a message from her assistant, followed by a series of texts from friends and family. "You won't believe it, but I heard about what happened on the flight. I'm so proud of you. That CEO really stood up for you, huh?" Mia smiled, feeling the warmth of their support through the screen. But more than that, it reminded her of the importance of standing up, not just for herself, but for others who couldn't. The truth was, the confrontation wasn't just about Rachel's disrespect. It was about something bigger. It was about accountability, about ensuring that people who held power, whether they were CEOs or flight attendants, understood that no one had the right to treat others with disdain. Not in the world Mia lived in, not anymore. As she stepped outside into the cool evening air, the bustling energy of the city surrounding her, Mia felt a sense of calm settle over her. She knew that the path she had chosen, the one that had led her to stand up for herself on that flight, was the right one. And she was ready to continue walking it, no matter what challenges lay ahead. She glanced up at the sky, watching as the planes passed overhead. In some ways, she felt as though she was watching her own journey unfold before her eyes. There would be more challenges, more moments when she would have to stand tall. But now she knew she was ready. She had learned something invaluable on that flight, not just about herself, but about the power of respect and the importance of holding others to the same standard. Mia walked forward, the world stretching out in front of her, with a renewed sense of purpose and the quiet knowledge that she had already made a difference. The airport terminal was bustling with people, their voices a low hum of conversation, the steady rhythm of rolling luggage filling the space. Mia moved through the crowd, her steps purposeful yet calm. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, not just within herself, but in the atmosphere around her. It was as though the echoes of the confrontation on the plane had reverberated far beyond the confines of the aircraft. Her phone buzzed again, snapping her out of her thoughts. She pulled it out to find another message, this time from her father. "Just heard the news. Proud of you for standing up for yourself. We've taught you that, haven't we? I know this is just the beginning." Mia smiled at the text, the simple words filling her with a sense of warmth. Her father had always emphasized the importance of dignity, of never allowing anyone to treat her as less than she was worth. And now, here she was, living those lessons out in real time. It felt good to know that her actions had aligned with everything he had taught her. But Mia knew that the impact of what had happened would extend beyond just her. The ripple effect was already being felt. Her colleagues had seen how she handled the situation, even though none of them had been there to witness the confrontation firsthand. She could feel it in the way they spoke to her now, with just a little more respect, just a little more admiration in their eyes. Mia's thoughts shifted to Rachel. The flight attendant had been humiliated, her arrogance shattered by Mr. Gray's decisive action. Mia couldn't deny that part of her felt a sense of vindication. Rachel had deserved to face the consequences of her actions. But as the hours passed, Mia found herself reflecting on the bigger picture. What would happen to Rachel now? Was this a turning point for her, or just a temporary setback? Mia had no illusions that people could change overnight, but she wondered if this experience would be a wake-up call. The sense of power that Rachel had wielded over passengers was gone, replaced by a quiet vulnerability. Would she reflect on her behavior, or would she slip back into the same old patterns once the dust had settled? As Mia stepped outside into the crisp evening air, she glanced up at the towering buildings around her, the city alive with possibility. It was easy to get lost in the noise of life, to forget the impact of individual moments. But today, Mia had experienced firsthand how one small act of standing up for herself could send ripples through an entire system. It wasn't just about her confrontation with Rachel. It was about the wider implications of what had happened. People were watching. They were listening. And when one person demanded respect, when they refused to back down in the face of injustice, others took notice. Mia knew this wasn't just her victory. It was a victory for everyone who had ever been underestimated or dismissed. It was a lesson about standing up for what was right, no matter the cost. The weight of it all settled in, and for the first time in hours, Mia allowed herself to breathe. She was grateful for the support she had received, not just from Mr. Gray, but from her colleagues, from the people who had quietly observed and now understood the importance of what had unfolded. She knew that the ripple effect would continue. People would talk, and the story of her confrontation with Rachel would circulate. It would be discussed, analyzed, and debated. But Mia wasn't worried about that. What mattered was that the right thing had been done. Rachel's actions had been addressed, and the message was clear. No one was above accountability. No one was exempt from the basic principles of respect and fairness. Mia continued to walk through the terminal, her mind clear and focused. There was still work to do, still challenges to face, but she had learned something invaluable on this flight. The power of one moment, one choice, to change everything. And in the quiet of her heart, Mia knew this was only the beginning. This flight, this confrontation, it was just the start of a much larger journey, a journey where she would continue to stand up for herself, for what was right, and for everyone who needed someone to stand up for them. As she stepped out into the world, Mia felt the weight of her own resolve. She wasn't just walking away from this experience, she was carrying it with her, the lessons, the strength, and the knowledge that she had made a difference. Mia's feet moved steadily across the polished floor of the terminal, her mind still processing the whirlwind of events that had unfolded on the flight. The confrontation with Rachel, the CEO's intervention, the undeniable shift in the atmosphere, it all seemed surreal in hindsight. But what lingered with her the most wasn't the immediate satisfaction of seeing justice done. It was the thought of how easily things could have gone differently. What if Rachel hadn't been caught? What if the CEO hadn't been there? The thought weighed heavily on her. For a moment she wondered how many other passengers in the same situation had been left to endure similar treatment without anyone stepping in? How many times had people been made to feel less than just because of their appearance, their social status, or the simple fact that they didn't fit into the mold of who someone like Rachel thought deserved respect? Mia's steps slowed as she thought about the bigger picture. The ripples of the flight attendant's actions hadn't just affected her. They had the potential to affect everyone she had encountered during the flight, from the passengers to the crew. But it was up to people like her, the ones who had the courage to speak up, to make sure that change wasn't just an abstract concept. A part of her wondered if she could do more. Could this be an opportunity to push for something greater? She thought back to the brief exchange with Mr. Gray, the CEO's acknowledgement of her actions. Was this an isolated victory, or could it be the first step toward a broader shift in how the airline, and perhaps even the industry, treated passengers? Mia shook her head. She didn't have all the answers yet. She had done what she could in the moment, and she had stood her ground. But now, standing in the quiet of the terminal, a new sense of purpose started to settle in her chest. She wasn't just a passenger on a flight anymore. She was part of something bigger, part of a movement toward accountability and fairness. And she was going to find a way to make sure her voice continued to be heard. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. This time, it was a message from her assistant, followed by an article link. "I just saw the news. The CEO made a statement about the incident. You're getting a lot of attention for standing up to that flight attendant." Mia clicked on the link, and as she read through the article, a wave of disbelief washed over her. The headline read, "CEO takes action against flight attendant after passenger faces discrimination." The article detailed the events from the flight, including Rachel's behavior, the CEO's response, and the subsequent action taken. Mia was mentioned by name as the passenger who had bravely confronted the situation. The story was circulating across social media, with many passengers and industry experts praising the CEO for his swift decision and for upholding the airline's values of respect and inclusivity. But as she scrolled through the comments, Mia noticed something unexpected. There were a number of messages supporting her, yes, but there were also critics, those who questioned why she hadn't just let it go, or those who believed she had caused an unnecessary scene. The negative comments were small in comparison to the support she was receiving, but they still stung. Mia exhaled slowly, putting her phone down. She wasn't surprised by the criticism. It came with the territory when you chose to speak out. What surprised her more was how much it still bothered her. She had expected to feel triumphant, proud of what she had accomplished. But now there was a lingering sense of discomfort. Did she do the right thing? Did she handle the situation in the best way possible? A voice in the back of her mind reminded her that no one would ever be able to please everyone. The critics were always going to be there, those who preferred to turn a blind eye, to avoid uncomfortable truths. But Mia wasn't one of them. She had always believed in standing up for what was right, even if it made her uncomfortable. The discomfort, she reminded herself, was part of the process. But this was just the beginning. This wasn't a victory to be savored in isolation. It was an invitation to take the conversation further, to challenge systems, and to ensure that people like Rachel never felt comfortable treating others with disrespect. The idea that this might spark a larger movement was exciting, but it was also daunting. Mia knew that being in the spotlight meant more than just the applause. It meant responsibility. It meant that every decision she made, every action she took, would be scrutinized, dissected. But she was ready. She knew this was a challenge she could rise to meet. Her assistant's message echoed in her head. "You're getting a lot of attention." The more she thought about it, the more she realized just how much power she had now. Not just as a passenger, but as a person with a platform. A voice that could carry far beyond this moment. It wasn't just about confronting Rachel anymore. It was about confronting the deeper issues at play, about ensuring that the airline industry, and beyond it, every industry, took a hard look at how people were treated based on their race, gender, appearance, or background. As she walked out of the terminal and into the city streets, Mia felt a renewed sense of purpose. The world had changed on that plane. She could feel it in the way people looked at her now. But more than that, she knew she had the ability to make it change even further. This wasn't just about a single confrontation. It was about changing how people treated each other, about insisting that every person, regardless of who they were, was treated with respect and dignity. And Mia knew that she was going to be at the heart of that change. The days following the flight were a blur for Mia. The article, the social media posts, and the overwhelming influx of messages from colleagues, friends, and even strangers had filled her inbox. The response to her actions had been massive. She had become a symbol of standing up against prejudice, someone who had forced the conversation into the spotlight. But even amid the praise, the weight of it all began to settle heavily on her shoulders. Mia sat at her desk, her laptop open in front of her. The screen was filled with emails, press inquiries, and comments from the media. People wanted to hear her side of the story, wanted her to explain what had driven her to speak up, to not let Rachel's actions slide. She thought about it for a moment before her fingers hovered over the keyboard. It wasn't just about what had happened on the plane anymore. It was about the bigger conversation, the conversation that needed to be had. It was about accountability, respect, and equality. Mia knew that this moment was bigger than her. She was just the one who happened to be in the right place at the right time. The spotlight had found her, but she wasn't going to let it fade into a fleeting moment of attention. This could be the start of something more, a movement, a shift in how people treated each other. She clicked open a new email to her assistant. "I need to meet with Mr. Gray. Let's get something on the books." The message was short, but it carried a weight behind it. Mia had decided. She needed to speak to the CEO. This wasn't about a personal meeting. It was about using the platform she had gained to push for real change. She wanted to understand what steps the airline was planning to take in light of what had happened. What were they doing to ensure that passengers were never treated with disrespect again? What could she do to help move the conversation forward? Mia leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. She had been waiting for this moment for days, ever since the flight landed. The overwhelming sense of support had been validating, but now there was a responsibility that came with it. A responsibility to not let the conversation die. The phone rang, breaking her thoughts. It was her assistant. "Mr. Gray's office just called," the assistant said. "They've scheduled a meeting for tomorrow. He wants to discuss your feedback about what happened on the flight." Mia felt a spark of excitement rush through her. It was happening. This wasn't just about a few words of support or a pat on the back. This was her chance to make a real difference. "Great," Mia replied. "Please confirm the time and send over the details. I'll be ready." As she hung up, Mia's mind raced with ideas. She had a list of things she wanted to discuss, things that went beyond her personal experience. She wanted to talk about policies, about training programs for staff, and about how they could make sure this kind of behavior wasn't just punished in one isolated instance, but rooted out across the entire company. She wanted to know how the airline would move forward, how it could set an example for others in the industry. And yet, as she prepared for the meeting, a part of her still wondered whether her actions would actually lead to any significant change. Would they just be another footnote in the corporate world of PR moves, or would this be a true catalyst for progress? Mia's phone buzzed again, this time with a message from one of her closest friends. "You've been incredible through all of this. But remember, real change is built over time. It's not always easy, and it won't happen overnight. Just keep pushing, keep speaking up, and you'll make it happen." Mia read the message slowly, letting the words sink in. Her friend was right. The road to meaningful change was long. The journey wasn't going to be as easy as one confrontation, but that didn't mean it wasn't worth the fight. The next morning, Mia dressed carefully, choosing her outfit with purpose. She was no longer just a passenger who had stood up to a flight attendant. She was now someone with a platform, someone with the potential to influence change. And that meant she had to approach this meeting with clarity and intention. When she arrived at the corporate offices, she was greeted with the usual professional efficiency, but this time there was a different energy in the air. People looked at her with recognition, some nodding in acknowledgement of the media coverage. But Mia wasn't focused on the attention. She was focused on what would come next. She was escorted into a sleek conference room where Mr. Gray was already waiting for her. His presence was as commanding as ever, but this time there was an openness in his demeanor, a willingness to listen. "Mia," he greeted her, standing up and offering a firm handshake. "I've been following everything that's happened. I want to thank you for bringing this to the forefront. It's not easy to speak up, especially when it involves something as sensitive as this." Mia smiled but didn't waste any time with pleasantries. "Thank you for taking the time to meet. I think it's important that we take the next step. What happened on the plane was an isolated incident, but it's part of a bigger issue that we need to address across the company." Mr. Gray nodded, his expression serious but open. "I agree. We've already begun reviewing the situation internally, but I want to hear your thoughts on how we can improve and make sure this doesn't happen again." Mia took a deep breath, feeling a sense of purpose settle over her. "First, I think we need to address how we train and hold our staff accountable. It's not enough to simply fire one person when they cross a line. We need to make sure that every employee understands the value of respect and inclusivity, and that these values are ingrained in everything we do. And we need to ensure that there's a system in place for passengers to report these kinds of incidents safely and without fear of retaliation." Mr. Gray listened carefully, nodding in agreement. "That's exactly what we're planning to do, but I need someone like you to help us guide these changes. Would you be open to collaborating with us on this?" Mia didn't hesitate. "Absolutely. It's time to take this conversation beyond one flight. This isn't just about making sure this doesn't happen again on your airline, it's about setting an example for the entire industry." The meeting continued, with Mia offering ideas, proposing solutions, and discussing actionable steps the airline could take to ensure that respect and fairness became the standard, not the exception. By the time the meeting ended, Mia had a sense of clarity and purpose she hadn't expected. It wasn't just a meeting, it was the beginning of something bigger. As she walked out of the conference room, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had started something on that flight, and now she was helping shape the future. This wasn't just about standing up for herself anymore. It was about changing the way the world treated others. Weeks passed, and the changes that Mia had advocated for began to take root. The airline's leadership took the feedback seriously, implementing new training programs that focused on diversity, inclusivity, and respect. Mia's partnership with Mr. Gray had set in motion a series of workshops and discussions for all staff, from flight attendants to the higher-ups, emphasizing the importance of treating every passenger with dignity. The airline also introduced a confidential reporting system, allowing passengers to speak out if they felt disrespected or mistreated, ensuring that no one would face the same kind of prejudice Mia had experienced. Mia kept her commitment to the cause. She spoke at several company-sponsored events and conferences, sharing her story and encouraging others to stand up when faced with injustice. Her voice resonated beyond the corporate world, inspiring many to challenge mistreatment in their own lives and industries. Though the work wasn't easy, Mia felt a growing sense of fulfillment. This wasn't just about the airline anymore. This was about creating a ripple effect that could change how people treated one another everywhere. Months later, Mia stood before a room full of eager faces at a leadership conference, the culmination of her efforts to bring real change to the industry. Her journey had evolved from a single flight incident into a movement, one that encouraged people to speak up and take action against discrimination in all its forms. As Mia looked out at the crowd, she felt a sense of pride and quiet satisfaction. The struggle for fairness was ongoing, but she had sparked a conversation that wasn't going away. She had played a part in transforming an entire industry's mindset, and she wasn't stopping there. This was just the beginning. The path ahead was long, but Mia knew she was exactly where she needed to be, fighting for a world where every person could walk into a room, a plane, or any situation, and be treated with the respect they deserved. The journey would continue.